What's boppin', boys? We're back with another episode of Lady Liberty's Fan Club. This episode's all about immigrants. Welcome to Now Selling the American Dream, Quantities Limited. Joining me are our fellow co-hosts Leah Phipps, Marika Danilak, Casey Bogdan, and Nidhi Kandi. I'm Jyoti Ramachandran, so let's get right to it. Leah, what you got for me today?
Today, we will be looking at this quote. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. This quote is engraved at the base of the Statue of Liberty and is written by Emma Lazarus.
So clearly this quote is talking about the fact that people from all walks of life, the homeless, tempest-tossed, as the quote says, are all welcome in America. It speaks of the welcoming attitude that Americans pride themselves on, saying that they will lift my lamp beside the golden door.
But do you really believe that's true, like the way immigrants are treated here?
Well, I didn't say that I agree with what the quote says, I was just explaining on what the quote means.
Yeah, I think that while Americans pride themselves on being a land of diversity and acceptance, ultimately, the American stance towards immigration has always been fueled by racism and xenophobia. America really hasn't fulfilled the ideal that it has set for itself.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's a lot of history of forced immigration that's happened in America over the years, and even today, there's so much racism that people have to deal with, not to mention the tiny amount of minority representation in the government.
Definitely, but we also have to acknowledge that America has taken many steps in the right direction. It's a lot more diverse than a lot of other countries. You can go basically anywhere and find a decent mix of different people.
That's pretty hard to disagree with, but actually, according to the Pew Research Center, compared with other countries receiving immigrants, the amount of U.S. population that is foreign-born is pretty small. The U.S. is 14% immigrants, and Australia is double that at 28%.
Okay, so America is diverse, but it definitely could be more so. It sounds like the pride that America has about its acceptance of immigrants isn't exactly justified.
That's true, but the phrase American dream has to come from somewhere, right? It's a much more common phrase than the Australian dream.
Yes, the opportunities in America are very idealized and desired, but who do they actually apply to? It's really only attainable for some select few. Like in history, it only applied to Northern European Protestants. Other minorities were and are held back by racist attitudes, right, Jyoti?
You're absolutely right, my dude. America forced immigrants into the country against their will and made their lives incredibly miserable, showing how America doesn't treat its immigrant population well. There is bias against immigrants due to stereotypes people associate with them, even if they aren't even true.
Take slavery, for example. America forced millions of Africans to migrate over, then forced them into backbreaking labor, and there was a lot of racism. Even later, after being freed and with the civil rights movement, African Americans are still struggling against the systematic racism that America set up. What do you think, Marika?
Yeah, absolutely. And this wasn't the first example of forced migration. Remember the Trail of Tears? The settlers who moved west forced the Native Americans out of their own land so they would have more to settle on. They were forced to leave behind their ancestral land that was very special to them, but no one cared about the Native Americans and what they would have to endure during their relocation.
Yeah, when they were forced to move west of the Mississippi River, they were exposed to disease and starvation killed many. So yeah, forcing people to leave their homes is a really bad idea and goes against the idea that America is welcoming and accommodating place to all people.
So, a lot of people were forced to move to America, or move to different regions in America, yet many people were denied access into the country at all. The Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882 that we found out about in Document 6 shows Chinese laborers were banned from coming to the U.S. This act, fueled by racism, successfully declined the rate of immigration of the Chinese population in the U.S. So clearly, the U.S. is not a land of acceptance, even from the beginning.
Valid points, y'all, and I'd like to add on the level of racist stereotypes Americans have used against immigrants for decades, maybe even eons. Mexicans have suffered from these since they immigrated, and their struggles were written about in the play Los Vendidos by Luis Valdez. It's about a guy called Honest Sancho and a government worker called Miss Jimenez. He's trying to sell different stereotypes of Mexicans to her, and she finally settles for the version that paints all other Mexicans as all the horrible stereotypes people have said about them, such as lazy, uneducated, and greedy.
Yikes. It also touched on the fact that Mexicans aren't being represented in the government. Rather, an idealized and whitewashed version of what a Mexican should be is represented. This whitewashed Mexican stems from racism and the pressure of one-way assimilation, showing how America sucks when it comes to immigrants being accepted.
And don't forget the Irish. Irish people were originally considered brutes and not white, as true Americans were protesting. They thought that the Catholic Irish would be more loyal to the Pope than to America, so they decided to get funky with racial discrimination. Because of the stereotypes associated with them, they were frequent subjects of voter disenfranchisement and racist caricatures, according to Mr. Owens' lecture.
Yeah, and there was also that one book that John Steinbeck wrote called The Grapes of Wrath. And there was one specific chapter that showed discrimination against migrants. Chapter 15 was in the setting of a shop with May and Al running the place. From page 2 of the packet, we see the influence stereotypes had on May, and she made assumptions about them without ever even meeting any immigrants. When a migrant family stopped by the shop, she was really rude by the way she served them and didn't even want to let them into the shop at first, just based on how they looked. She then proceeded to refuse to sell them any food below the price point, even though the family couldn't afford to spend a lot of money and truly needed the help from her.
Okay, clearly May was influenced by all the rumors and stereotypes that she heard of immigrants, because even though the family was really nice and friendly about the whole situation, she was still very stiff and hostile about the whole interaction. The only reason she changed her mind towards the end of the chapter was that because Al told her what to do. This classic piece of literature shows how contradictory the sentiment of America being very open to diversity and people from all walks of life is in comparison to how they're actually treated, right?
Not only did John Steinbeck write The Grapes of Wrath, but also Starvation Under the Orange Trees, making him a vocal advocate for immigrants. In Starvation Under the Orange Trees, Steinbeck stated, "It was a custom in California to import great numbers of Mexicans, Filipinos, Japanese, to keep them segregated, to herd them about like animals, and if there were any complaints, to deport or imprison the leaders."
The farm owners exploited the immigrants, showing how their motives weren't to make the U.S. a diverse and accepting nation, but to take advantage of those in need of labor jobs. The fact that John Steinbeck, a non-immigrant, took the liberty to expose the poor living conditions of immigrant workers really emphasizes how big of an issue the treatment of them was.
Alright guys, gate points. So, let's recap this, just for our listeners at home.
So, while America is a fairly diverse and highly regarded nation, it really doesn't deserve all the recognition that it gives itself.
This is very clearly shown in its track record of how it treats immigrants and even those that were in America long before the country was ever established.
This treatment is so prominent that it is even the focus of it is even the main focus of many literary works.
So, America being a land of diversity and acceptance is a bit of a stretch, as racism and xenophobia are unfortunately part of the foundation of the country.
Wow, I think we're running out of time, but great job, you guys. And thank you, dear listeners. Make sure to subscribe, as you won't want to miss next week's episode, Bad Apples, The Experience of Shoddy American Goods, with a special interview with Coach Cody Owens. Stay funky, fresh, and most of all, stay smart. What's boppin'? What's boppin', boys? We're back with another episode of Lady Liberty's Fan Club. You can't sound like you're crying! Welcome to another episode of Lady Liberty's Fan Club. This episode's all about the immigrants. Welcome to... Why did you say immigrants? We're back with another episode of Lady Liberty's Fan Club. This episode's all about the immigrants. Don't say it like that! Welcome to... There's like nothing... What's poppin', boys? We're back with another episode of Lady Liberty's Fan Club. This episode's all about...